listening to the Pharmacy Podcast Network.
This is Pharmacy Crossroads with your host, community pharmacy business veteran, the road trip guy, Bruce Nealand. Community pharmacy is at a crossroads. Pharmacy owners across the country are evolving their pharmacy businesses and making a bigger impact on their communities. Bruce talks with the most innovative community pharmacy owners, pharmacy industry experts, and people who are passionate about the business of pharmacy and its impact on community healthcare. Pharmacy Crossroads is a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. And now, here's our host, Bruce Nealand.
Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, friends and neighbors. This is Bruce Nealand with another episode of Pharmacy Crossroads. And boy, am I excited to be here today. I've got a chance to talk with two pharmacy experts, one who actually owns a pharmacy and does stuff, and another who kind of coaches and helps people on how to do it. And So we're going to jump right in, and I'm going to ask Scott Wittnebel to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about who he is and how he helps pharmacies as part of the Independent Pharmacy Cooperative, or IPC, Pharmacy Services Team. Is that right, Scott W?
Yeah.
We got two Scotts, so we're going to say Scott W and Scott P, and you'll find out who Scott P is in just a minute. So Scott W, tell us who you are.
Well, thank you for having me, Bruce. It's an honor to be with you today. And my name is Scott Wittnebel, and I work, as Bruce said, I work with members at Independent Pharmacy Cooperative. And I work with the 9 regional directors. I'm the senior member advisor on that team, and also work with our inside reps and member service and the credit department, and been blessed to work with thousands of independent pharmacy owners and managers over the years, a little over a decade. And in my time, I've been able to talk with and experience a lot of what happens in a pharmacy through their eyes and through their experiences. And our focus today will be centered on one part of our mission that helps members enhance profitability as it relates to their primary wholesale agreements.
Primary wholesaler agreements, or PVA, primary vendor agreements, is the topic for today. You've all got one, whether you like it or not, and we're going to try to share a little bit of information how you can take fuller advantage of it. And now we have the real world person, the one who has to make that work. This is Scott Patterson, and I got to tell you, Scott and I go back
long ways,
35 years. And we're going to have an argument here in a little bit who's been with Health Mart longer, or he's obviously been with Health Mart for years, but he and I were colleagues or friends when I was with Health Mart back in the 80s, and Scott was on our advisory board and was a wonderful retailer then, and he survived, which would indicate he's a good retailer now. So Scott Patterson, introduce yourself and tell our listeners who you are.
Good morning. I'm Scott Patterson. I am a pharmacist and a business owner, and I've never known exactly what I want to do when I grow up. So I do a lot of different things, but I am blessed to have 6 pharmacies, and they aren't a molded type of pharmacy like many small chains. We have 2 large stores, 2 small stores, 1 clinic pharmacy, and 1 closed door pharmacy. So a variety of different things that we do, compounding. Our newest venture is hearing aids. And so we've been blessed over the years, and I've been blessed to, Bruce and my path has crossed numerous times at either conventions, doing things. He's been out to even visit my store once.
That's right. And I was there the day after you had the tornado. You're from Kansas.
Yes.
So you've had a few tornadoes out that direction. It was the only one I've ever lived through. They actually made us go to the center of the hotel and all line up in the hall on the bottom floor. So that was an exciting way to get introduced to Clay Center, Kansas. So PVAs, primary vendor agreements. Scott, tell us a little, Scott Wittnebel, Scott W., tell us a little bit about PVAs, where'd they come from, and what's the key things to look for?
Well, Bruce, in my travels in working with members throughout the years, I hear a lot of things. They say they're trying to find out the rules of the game, establish a strategy that helps to optimize that. And I've seen a lot of strategies work in different ways, taking away a lot of tools and best practices. And, these are necessary from the primary wholesaler to establish that relationship so that pharmacies can get everything that they need. And we've seen over the years more relationships develop outside of the primary vendor agreement, but that still seems to be a staple within community pharmacy and in the independent realm. So, I've kind of broken it down into 4 steps when working with members to try to help them optimize their agreement.
What's step number 1, Scott?
Well, it really starts with analysis.
Okay.
It's important to identify your representatives. And every wholesaler will have a representative that works with the pharmacy owner and manager. If they're part of a buying group, they'll have a representative there as well. And they can help guide in outlining the guidelines as it relates specifically to compliance and the cost structure.
Okay.
So I've seen different models work in different ways, and it's important to look at different models because every model will impact the workflow differently in each pharmacy, and there's different tools required as well to optimize those models.
So how do you determine the cost of your items? Tell us a little bit about determining the price.
That's really step 2. And I hear all the time people say, I don't know what my final price is. I don't know if I'm making money on a prescription or not. And so once we identify the tools or the guidelines within the agreement, then we'll use those to break down the cost. And that's really going to be impacted by the invoice discount and then monthly, quarterly, and sometimes yearly rebates that are paid as well.
So rebates, kind of a critical part. You have to get them, right?
Yeah, and there's a key component to that now. There's always a compliance measure. Most, if not all, agreements out there have some form of compliance measure that's in the GCR category. And that really looks at measures the percentage of total RX purchased that are generics. There are other compliance measures. It might be percent of the wholesale source generics to the total generics. It might be percentage of prescriptions bought to those dispensed, and might be the percentage of specialty and some other ratios as well.
Okay, so I mean, that's a lot of moving parts, and I take it that part of what you and your team do is help a pharmacy not only understand it but to monitor those moving parts.
Yeah, there's a need to manage those, sometimes monthly, quarterly. So I'll go in and we work with members then to help them identify the tools. These tools might be in their pharmacy management system. They're likely in their ordering platform from their wholesaler. And then there's other tools that they can use by partnering with other vendors to manage these ratios.
So I'm going to turn to Scott P., who actually has to do this. Do you do this, or do you have people on your team who get assigned to watch this? And what insights can you share with our listeners about how to maximize lowering their cost of goods?
Okay. My experience is that, yes, I kind of do the negotiation of the contract. Then my employees get to tell me how bad the contract was because of underwater claims. And so I was in the process of getting ready to renegotiate my supplemental supply agreement and reached out to my area representative for IPC. And basically, he got me in contact with Scott. Scott called me and went through the analysis. And basically, it was really a godsend to me. He made it simple, easy, showed me some things that I hadn't looked at before on McKesson Connect. and also on Health Mart Atlas, that I could see what my final costs were. And then I could compare it to what McKesson was proposing for my new supply agreement.
And so were you able to get something better than you had?
Yes, there's always some give and take.
Yeah.
So I had to give some things, but Scott told me a few things that my ask should be. And that helped a lot, because when you look at these, they're fairly intricate and there's a lot of moving parts in them. And some of the things that McKesson wanted to delete, I felt were difficult for me to give up. But on the other hand, with Scott's help, he kind of showed me some areas that I could negotiate with McKesson, and it, I think, worked out to be a good contract for both of us.
Well, and I'm going to insert here one of the ideas that comes to my mind. How many of you other pharmacy owners' contracts have you seen?
I haven't really seen
I'm
anybody.
assuming none.
That's right.
So Scott W., how many different pharmacy contracts have you seen?
Well, in their entirety, a handful.
I'm not looking for a literal number, but many.
Sure, many. And, also throughout the years, bits and pieces. And those bits and pieces are really important. And as Scott mentioned, breaking this down, it really helps us moving forward to take the next step. And that's to develop a purchase strategy. Now that we know what the guidelines are, we know what the tools are, we understand how to get to the final price, we'll look at a strategy and develop that. And that's really important because, as Scott and I work together on that, there's other store managers and other people doing the ordering. So it's really important that once the strategy is developed, to then communicate that to all parties involved, and then have regular reviews. Initially, might be weekly touch points to make some small tweaks, and then monthly. And then I always recommend quarterly and yearly reviews of this information as well.
And this is, when you went to pharmacy school, you learned how to negotiate contracts, right?
Oh, yes. That was like Pharmacy 101, but no, they didn't cover that at all.
Yeah.
This is a different world than when I started.
Well, and, the piece that strikes me from this conversation is, you're looking at it up close. You live with it. You live or die by what happens here. But Scott W. and his team, they get to see a bunch of these, and that just makes them an important ally when you finally sit down to negotiate this. That perspective of being able to know what somebody else got, what somebody else got, what somebody else got, what that looked like, that's a valuable asset that I think you ought to emphasize a little bit more. You've got experience in doing this. I'm trying to sell my house right now, and I've signed 20 documents that I attest that I'm going to read them before I read them, and I haven't read any of them, but I'm trusting my realtor. And it strikes me that that you have that perspective that you can guide and direct. So I'm interested in the strategy. Tell me just a little bit more. What are 2 or 3 strategic things that you bring to the table?
Well, there's a lot there, Bruce. The first one is identifying those partners that can help. So I'd encourage all owners out there, reach out to your buying group representatives, reach out to your wholesale representatives. And if you don't have a representative that you can trust maybe, or that can help break this down for you and that you're comfortable with, is then reach out to us at IPC, and we can help guide that as well, whether it's knowing what questions to ask or what things to look for within your business. We can kind of start there. But also, as it relates to different trends, we're seeing a lot of different impacts here that people have to build into their strategy. And it might be differential pricing as it relates to brand name discounts. And
tell me what that means.
Sure. You'd have typically the discount on brands is communicated in a wholesale acquisition or a WAC minus invoice discount. And it's important to know what that discount is, but then also what brand names that impacts, because you might have specialty GLP-1 items are are fitting into that now, where you may not qualify for your invoice discount that's standard. And it's important to know what those are and how those are impacted by the formularies and maybe what the prescribers are writing in your area.
So any practical applications of this, Scott P., that you can share where you might have made saved $1 or something like that?
Yeah, there were several suggestions that Scott made. And part of it is we have 340B, and that impacts our buying of generics and buying of brand names and that. And we've been fortunate, blessed, because it's been good for our stores to have 340B. Two of my stores do not, and that makes a huge difference. One thing that has impacted me a great deal, or I hope will impact me, with some of the things that Scott showed me on the website, the McKesson website, that I can make my other pharmacies more compliant and get better discounts than what we've been receiving now. A few things that we've missed, and you don't have to miss the mark far, and you lose your discount. And so Scott has volunteered to coach my other 5-6 pharmacists that work in the stores that are actually the worker bees, and go through these same graphs and charts and make sure that we are being compliant, getting the best discount. So it was very helpful, and I really appreciate his work with me on looking at the contract. But more important is how that contract will impact my pharmacies down the road.
Well, and you mentioned something there that stands out when you mentioned 340B. There's different, as pharmacies and owners look to branch outside of standard traditional retail pharmacy, 340B, long-term care, other segments impact that. And it's really important, and I encourage everyone to break down the profitability of each one of those segments by themselves, but then also how it relates to the profitability of the package deal, if you will, and how that impacts your retail pharmacy also.
So I'm going to make that famous mistake that they say lawyers should do, is never ask a question they don't already know the answer to. But I am intrigued by what you say there with long-term care and 340B. I mean, are you equipped to help coach a guy on whether that's a good idea or not for him, based on what you know about the marketplace and what you clearly know about the pricing stuff?
That's a great question. And I can work within the parameters of what's considered high level for those. And what's great about IPC is I have other members of my team and the pharmacy services team that are experts in that area. And then we also rely on many of our vendor partners to help where we need gaps filled in as well.
Okay. And has the 340B program been a good part of your business, Scott P.?
Yes, it has been an excellent part for the most part. There are always headaches. Inventory swell has been a problem with almost every pharmacist. And I've talked to many of my friends and cohorts about how do you operate your pharmacy more efficiently, keep the inventory down. We've gotten some things. We're working with our pharmacy computer network to try to improve our turns, because turns are where you make the money. And so 340B has been a big benefit to our pharmacies.
And then you've got the long-term care facility. I'm assuming that's a segregated inventory, completely different contracts and all that stuff.
Yeah,
right?
Different contracts, different reimbursements, no DIR fees, which is huge in this market. And so, and those are all moving parts, and it seems like they all change. And that was one thing that Scott helped me through on looking at some different things that maybe if I did take out a segment of drugs, that McKesson would give me a different discount. It would improve my overall discount on the rest of my product. And so that was one of the main things that we focused on, I think, when you and I talked.
Right. And then moving forward, the strategy will be to look at how that all relates to your long-term care and 340B business as well.
So trends, we're in interesting times in pharmacy. I've been around in August 50 years, and all 50 of them have been interesting times in pharmacy. But what are you, Scott W., what are 2 or 3 of the things that you see coming at us that you really want to help people get prepared for?
Well, the differential pricing was one that, we touched on. I can't stress enough. It's important to identify that segment, the what and how much of a discount there is on that. And then the segments that are broken down, as well as this. One of the things to look at is, as we see secondary source options and that segment growing in the secondary market, it's really important to break down the impact those have on the rest of the business, because it's really easy to take a phone call and start placing orders. But if that's not built into the strategy, it'll be really important to maybe overstock yourself and change your inventory turns. And, with the DIR cliff coming and the hangover that'll create, that could have some impact. So it's really important to look at those turns now and make sure that you understand how all these sources that you're buying from impact those costs as well.
Scott, any specific example? I mean, maybe a drug or something like that you've had an opportunity to buy different or buy better, and talk a little bit about the secondary market. I mean,
I have one of my pharmacists is very, very good at looking at buying from the secondary market. He will compare, and we usually use a 25 to 30% cost difference as kind of the marker. And he does a very good job. And I was going to say, there are all sorts of things. Levothyroxine probably comes to mind. That is one thing that we see that we can buy on the secondary market a lot less expensive than what we do from our primary vendor. One of the things that I feel at one of my other pharmacies, they were doing too much of the secondary market buying,
right,
and ended up losing valuable discount on all my other purchases. And so we went, and if I can mention a name, RX Assassins, and they have helped that store a lot in making sure that we're a compliant pharmacy as far as making sure we get to the quotas that are put forth.
Well, and it's funny. There's that old saying, you're tripping over dollars to save pennies. And I think the mindset of many pharmacists is detail oriented. They love looking at numbers. They love looking at details. And God bless America, I'm glad they do, because they got to look at an awful lot of NDC numbers and keep track of all those details. But it's easy for a person to think that they can save their way to success. And, the time spent and the risk of losing the generic compliance, that's easy for me to say. You all know what I'm trying to say. So stop laughing. And
the GCR,
the GCR, that's why we have acronyms. And I worked for a guy back in my early parts of my careers, was saying, you not only have to figure out how to save, but you need to figure out how to grow. And, figuring out how to market the pharmacy, how to build that segment of the pharmacy that's making money, that deserves an awful lot of attention as well. So it's a balance. It's a fine balance. I think we're coming up on the close here. So I'm going to ask Scott W., I guess. I'm jumping off script here, but I do that a lot. Kind of give us the one zinger, the thing that you really want pharmacists to know or do different because they listen to this. And then Scott P. will go to you for the close, but I always get the last word. So.
Okay.
Well, I would encourage everyone to look for some red flags that would prompt you to want to have this discussion with one of your representatives. And, if I can take a minute to do that.
Please, yeah.
I think look at we talked about brand names and the invoice discount, and those can change quarterly. And because it's an invoice discount, and I think sometimes people look at those and order those without necessarily thinking as much as they do about generics, because there isn't the secondary source options for those like there is for the generics. So as it relates to brands, check your last purchase price. And if you're seeing that your commonly used brands are a higher price than they were maybe last quarter, that's a red flag that you'll want to investigate why. And it's a simple call to one of your representatives, partners at the wholesale representative or the buying group representative, and find out why. Start to look at your trends, get familiar with how much specialty, insulin, GLP-1 in those classes, and get familiar with how much of that you're dispensing now versus a year ago, and then how it relates to your costs. If that has spiked and it's having an impact on your costs, that's a good reason to call your rep. Just ask for a review. If it's been a while, ask for a review. And if you again, don't have a trusted source for that, give us a call.
And just to make sure you know who to call, this is sponsored by the Independent Pharmacy Cooperative. So you can find them on the internet at www.ipcrx.com, and I'm sure somebody would be happy to take your call. So,
well, thank you. Thanks for the commercial there, Bruce.
Yeah.
I also working with members over the years all over the country. We talked about shopping around a little bit. If you feel like you have to buy 100% from one wholesaler, or if you have to have 10 or 12 wholesalers, then it's a good reason to have a review and develop a strategy and look at how different strategies can impact your business.
That I'm going to emphasize that 1 is too few and 10 is too many.
That's right.
That is right.
Yeah.
If you don't know your compliance measures, or if you're not achieving your targets, or if you don't know if you're achieving your targets, those are all red flags as well. If that's the case, find a representative that can break that down for you.
Yeah, that's good. Scott P.,
Yes.
any war story success you can share?
Well, I think number one is, I think your buying plan is just like walking into your store. We all think we know exactly what it is and how good it looks, but it's always good to have outside eyes look at something and give us an honest assessment of how that compares with what is being provided in the field. My second thought is, I want to give Scott a lot of business here and keep his staff really working hard. I can't tell you how much he helped me just looking at the numbers. And I'm kind of a numbers guy, but he showed me some numbers that I hadn't looked at before. So my final closing is, we all need to find more places where we have cash business. And, that's why we're looking at hearing aids. Whatever we can do to generate cash business in our store, that's the king.
And you hit on one of my favorite topics. And at breakfast today, talking with a couple other pharmacy owners, we got onto that topic, and the point I like to make is the biggest problem with cash customers is between the owner's two ears. You start thinking about it, and I'll tell you that it was one of the in-your-face experiences. I talked to a guy about 3 years ago who sent me a copy of a news. He's on the local news because he was doing PGX testing, pharmacogenomics. Mm-hmm. And I called him up and said, hey, tell me about this. And I says, how much does it cost? And he says, well, I charge $600. And I said, will insurance pay for that? And he said, hell no, and I hope they never do. And I stuttered and I said, well, why? And he says, well, if insurance starts paying for it, my reimbursement is going to go down to the point where it won't be worth doing. He also talked about how it was helpful for people not to have their insurance company know what their results were. So there was a little bit of legitimacy in that as well. But people pay for stuff that they want. They won't pay for what they've gotten for free. They won't pay in your pharmacy if it looks exactly the same as it looked in the past. So if you're going to get into stuff, you got to spruce it up. You got to make it look right. You got to fix the appearance of your store up. But, my wife goes to a Bowen therapy thing, which is some kind of combination between acupuncture and massage. And she pays $100 a session for that. Now we have the money to do it. But I did some volunteer work for my church in inner city Philadelphia a few years ago. And these were the poorest of poor people. But they all had gold jewelry because they wanted it and they figured out a way. And, the final thing I'll say about paying, well, they had the cell phones, Scott P pulls out his phone. They all had the cell phones, and that boggled my mind because they weren't all that common back in 2005, 2006. But there's programs for people to get those. But the point is people will pay for what they want, and they will want what you show them will make them feel better. And that's, my bottom line is you're not in the business of filling prescriptions. You're in the business of making people feel better. And that's medicine does that, but it's your attitude and your friendly demeanor and the advice that you give and, the products that you sell that will help them feel better, whether it's a drug nutrient depletion or whether it's, skin cream or something. And I love to say, 20% of the population has diabetes, 100% of us have skin.
Yeah.
So there's huge ways to go, and they're being opened up and they're there. So I've waxed, hopefully eloquent, at least I've waxed too long, but I'm delighted to reconnect with you, Scott P, and have wonderful memories of visiting your store. 8 years ago now. It's been a long time. And Scott Wittnebel, thank you so much for that, ladies and gentlemen. This is Bruce Nealon signing off with another episode of Pharmacy Crossroads, where we hope something we've said here today will help you do more and be better.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Pharmacy Crossroads. If you're interested in talking with Bruce, please contact the show. Visit pharmacycrossroads.com. We look forward to hearing from you.